Mirëmbrëma, më quaj Renis Nushaj, unë jam avokat të prokuror këtu në komunitetin tonë dhe kam pasur kënaqësinë gjithmonë të përfaqësoj këtë komunitet prej vitesh. Gjatë çdo fushat elektorale, sjell her pas here politikan, gjykatës, kandidat për zyra të ndryshme në këtë shtetin tonë në mënyrë që të përfaqësojmë komunitetin tonë. Sot kam kënaqësinë që të kem PADMA KUPPën, që është përfaqësuese e shtetit Michiganit dhe është kandidate për senat në shtetin tonë. PADMA, welcome. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
PADMA, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born and raised, and give us a background if you would.
So sure. My story starts actually with my parents, like everyone else's. They lived in India. They wanted higher education. And when I was 4 years old, my father decided to come to the United States. He's a PhD in English literature, and he felt that he would be best served by coming to a country where English was the main language. My mother and I followed him in 1970, and I spent the next 10 years plus in the United States, going to public schools as my parents got their education. And then we went back to India when I was 15. I finished high school and college and came back as a foreign student to the United States. And I've made America my home since 1988.
And what education do you have? What's your background?
So when I was little, when we went back to India, my mom always said, America wants engineers and doctors. And so for me, I loved math. I didn't like the sight of blood. And so if I wanted to come back to America, I decided I needed to become an engineer. I like to make things, and so I became a mechanical engineer. And that's actually how in 1998, I ended up in Michigan with a job in the automotive industry.
Good. And what kind of engineer are you, if I may?
Mechanical.
Thank you. And tell us about your family, your immediate family.
So my parents still live in India. My husband and I met here in the United States. He is also Telugu, which is a language that we both speak. And my two children were born in New York, when we were younger. And then we came to Michigan because both of us wanted jobs in the auto industry and wanted to raise our family. And we found Troy to be a really great place. Southeastern Michigan is very diverse, so we could find all sorts of restaurants and food and grocery stores and just a lot of art and culture. And so we moved to Troy, bought our house in Troy, and I started volunteering because my kids were young and I got a job in the automotive industry and
Excellent, thank you. And obviously, you and I know each other. I've known you for a long time. I know of all your involvement and I know about your career, your successful career. But could you tell us more about the nature of your involvement? How were you involved in the community and what did you enjoy about it?
Sure. So, when you love something, you help it thrive by volunteering. And for me, that was always one of the most important things, is that you help others. I saw the need in India was very extreme. Poverty is visible on the street. But here, while it's not so visible, you still want to help others who are vulnerable. You want to help those who don't have access to food, or maybe they're not able to access the best education. But I also saw in our own schools in Troy that many of the immigrant parents didn't get involved, didn't go to the school PTA, the parent-teacher organizations. And so I started getting involved, volunteering in the schools. And from there, I went on. People would encourage me to volunteer in other places, and so I volunteered in various municipal boards. So in the city of Troy in 2002, I joined the Ethnic Issues Advisory Board, and we did different kinds of things to expose people to other cultures, and basically got involved in many city-related things, and I eventually ended up on Planning Commission. And through those years, I recognized that we didn't have good representation from the immigrant community. And so I used to also encourage others of immigrant background to join me to get involved in our country and in our state and in our city.
And how did you come to run for office the first time around?
So it took a long time for me to be convinced that I needed to run. When I was involved in the public schools, one of the things that I saw is that our state legislature, where we have a state senate and a state house, they are the ones that make the decisions about how we fund our public schools. Public schools to me were very important because I saw how I had gone through public schools, and then I went to India and we didn't have good education that was provided by the government. And so I felt that to support that kind of opportunity for all children. You know, you can send your child to a religious school or to a private school, but that way public schools allow every child, no matter who their parent is, what their background is, where they live, they get access to opportunity, because education is that basic building block for an economy. And so as my children were going through the schools from 2000 to 2016, when my younger one graduated, I saw every year how our education budgets were cut. And the state legislature is where they decide what the education budget is. Our cities and our states are funded by our tax dollars that we pay, but the state legislature is decide who gets what. And every year I was asked, about 2005, I was asked, oh, Padma, you should run for something. You should run for something. And I hate politics. I'm an engineer. I fix problems. I want to build cars. It was never really about making laws. But really, budget should reflect your values. When you want a nice house or you want to go on a vacation, you budget for it. You don't just put it on your credit card and not pay off, but you make decisions that reflect your values. So you fund your roads, you fund your schools. And for me, funding children's education is essential for a civil society. And that's what prompted me to run in 2018. And I knew that since I'd never run before, I had to really focus and do it. And so I quit my job. I didn't know if I would win or not, but I knew that I could get another job if I didn't. And the company that I worked for, Ally Financial, said, if you don't win, we'll take you back. And so I ran and I won in that first election that I ran.
And what was the jurisdiction of that first one?
So currently I represent Troy and Clawson, that's House District 41. And that's actually one of the ways I know you, because Clawson is a small city of about 12,000, 15,000 people. And every city has a structure of government. There's departments, and then there's city council that's elected, but they also have to have legal counsel. And so I really appreciated getting to know you through my work with Clawson.
Absolutely, and it was my pleasure, of course, knowing you and seeing how involved you are and how much you're dedicated to the well-being of both cities, obviously, that you represent, but even seeing the dedication of someone like you for a small town such as Clawson, which is obviously my love and joy as the city attorney for the city. Seeing your dedication, your commitment, your responsiveness to any and all of our requests. Without our requests, you're responsive. Obviously, it caused me to appreciate everything that you do as a person, as a representative. The new seat that you're running for, what is it? What does that entail? So
we have two chambers. Just as at the federal level, we have two chambers, the Senate and the House. In the Michigan State Legislature, we have two chambers. This House is 110 districts. Each district is about 90,000 people. In the Senate, it's about 3 times the size with 260,000. A map of the district can be found at electpadmakuppa.com. But the cities that are included are Troy and Rochester Hills, the western part of Sterling Heights up until Van Dyke, the city of Utica, which is even tinier than the city of Clawson at 5,200 people, and then 4 precincts in Oakland Township and 3 precincts in Shelby Township. This is Senate District 9. Currently, there is no elected state senator in that district. I am the only elected state legislator in the entire district. And so I am the incumbent in the House, but I'm running for Senate.
And what does a senator for our state do?
So 38 senators work with the governor and ensure that we not only create laws based on different groups coming forward, and I'll talk about that, but we also set the budget. So we make sure that we don't balance the budget on the backs of working families. And that is something that we have not been doing. If you live in Rochester Hills, for example, you pay an extra millage, or in Sterling Heights, you pay an extra millage for your parks. We cut city funding over the last 20, 25 years that I've lived here in Michigan. We've seen every year how the money that we send to Lansing doesn't come back to southeastern Michigan. That instead of paying us back what we needed for our cities and for our schools, that money is being used to balance the rest of the state's budget. and we're not really taking care of working families. And so I'd like to see that change. That's one of the things that I really want to do, is how to make government more effective, but also to make sure that the communities that are paying to fund government are getting the monies back to because we're the economic engine of the state here in southeastern Michigan.
That is so true. And I think that's probably the answer to what's at stake in this race, in this campaign that you're doing right now. And I wanted to ask you in that regard, what do you hope to accomplish if you do prevail in your campaign?
So first, these last 4 years, I have served in the minority. That means that the party that I belong to does not have the majority and does not get to set the agenda. And one thing that has happened is American politics has become very divisive, and because I'm in the minority party and I am in a district that is evenly split, they don't want to see, the majority party does not want to see me have any legislative wins, because they're worried that I will get to the next level and get to the next position. And so they've not allowed me, even though I have a lot of good ideas, and it's not just me, a lot of people around me come to me with good ideas, and so advancing those ideas is really important to me. And advancing ideas that help working families. There's a lot of things that we could do. And in the 4 years that I've been there, one of the things that we have been able to do is bring back money to our schools and to our cities so that we are funding the basic services. Right now, we've improved our funding over the last 4 years for schools, for cities. And I'll tell you, when I went in, we were bottom in terms of investment in public schools and in our children. Today, we are no longer at the rock bottom. We could still fix the funding model and how we do it. And I think as an engineer with a person who's interested in math, I'm very excited about going in there, rolling up my sleeves and figuring out how we do that. There are suggestions from organizations like Launch Michigan. There's actually a great report called Fund My Schools, MI being Michigan, MI, instead of MY for my schools. And there's really good ideas that are already there. We need to implement those ideas. One other thing that I really care about is what happens as you age. You know, in India, we have something called a joint family. And I find with a lot of immigrant families, that happens where we're kind of lost because adult children live with their children in another house, and then the parents who are aging live in another house. We used to all have, 3 generations. My grandmother, my parents, and my brother were all in the same home in Hyderabad when I came to the United States for graduate school. And so what happens, how do we age in our own homes? How do we make sure that we have the support services that we need as we age, whether it's public transit so that you don't have to drive a car anymore because maybe you're getting older, and also how do you have the support services? So maybe you have to change the light bulb in your house and you are going to fall off the ladder and hurt yourself if you're older. So these are certain things that we can create, support services for older people. And I started something called the Care Caucus, because not only are there people who are receiving care, but also those who are giving care, and making sure that caregiving is professionalized and making sure that the experience of both the caregiver and the care provider is one that's mutually beneficial.
Excellent. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, what will be lost if your opponent in this race wins?
So first I'll say that my opponent has been part of that 40 years of Republican leadership in Lansing that has allowed money to be taken from southeastern Michigan and used to balance the budget. So I think that's one thing, that I'm a math person. I really understand what we should do differently. And plus, I listen to people in the district. I'll give you an example. There's a huge issue around gun violence prevention. For 6 years, before I was in the legislature, my opponent was in the legislature, and there were many bills that were introduced, including safe storage of guns, and ensuring that we did background checks on people who are purchasing guns and the types of guns that are sold. We don't need automatic weapons, but just there's so many things around gun violence prevention that could have been enacted, that have been enacted in many other states. And yet our legislature, which is led by people like my opponent, refused to even give them a hearing. So you couldn't even consider the merits of the policy and move that forward. And I think that's really important. There are a lot of people who are concerned. If you go to a grocery store, you don't want to get shot. If you go send your child to school, you don't want to see them get shot. These are some basic things. Policies need to be at least given a hearing so that you can determine if there's any merit. For this summer, we've had so many opportunities. We could have done something about the gas tax. We needed to make sure that we had a balanced budget, that we didn't do it without settling and making sure that we be paid for something. I mean, this is in our homes when we make our budgets. We don't just borrow from one line of what we're spending on to pay for, you have to make sure that you have the money to pay for something. But we needed to do that, and for 3 months we haven't met. And this is the kind of legislative behavior. Plus, there's a lot of corruption. My opponent served alongside a Speaker of the House who is now being investigated for criminal misconduct and corruption and embezzlement. In fact, this person also donated heavily to my opponent. So I'm very much a person of integrity. I am very clear where I'm getting my money from and who my funders are and my donors are, and I don't embezzle money.
Indeed. And thank you for that. That was very helpful and very useful for all of us to know. I have a question now with respect to the day-to-day dynamics of a campaign. What does that entail? What does a campaign to be a senator for our state entail?
So as a legislator or as a candidate, one of the most important things that you can do is do voter outreach, because people need to know who you are and what you represent. So being here in this studio, speaking to the Albanian community is very important to me, because I want people who I normally would not, I know you, but I don't know the broader Albanian community. And I think it's very important that you understand my immigrant story, that it's for me, it's about making sure that every child has access to opportunity, and that getting the word out there costs money. And so the first thing I'll do is raise money to run a campaign. Second thing I do is go out and speak with voters. So here I am at the studio. My next event is to go speak with people in Rochester Hills. Another day, actually before this, I was knocking on doors in a neighborhood, and we talk to voters. We go directly to their door and we canvass and we say, this is who I am, and usually that takes about 90 seconds, because I usually just say, I'm the current state representative. I'm running to be your state senator or the state senator for this new area, this new district, Senate District 9. These are the reasons I ran: for education, to protect our Great Lakes, and to ensure that we have a strong economy. What are the things that you care about? And that way I get to hear. In fact, when I knocked doors in 2019, which was not an election year for me, people used to ask me, why are you coming to knock on our door? And I would say, because I like this, because this makes me feel that really we're working together. Because as a representative, I want to know what your concerns are on a day-to-day, ongoing basis. I hold office hours. I make sure that I hold events where I can hear from people, so that what work I'm doing in the legislature is what the people that I'm representing want me to do.
That's excellent. And who works in your campaign?
So in a campaign, you usually have a campaign manager. We have a young man who worked on other campaigns in different capacities, and I interviewed him because his background was with data and field. Like, where do you knock? Who do you focus on? How do you do the outreach? How do you use digital advertising and TV and mail to get your message across? Because obviously I will knock on 100 doors and may only talk to 20 people. So we need to make sure that those other 80 people that I missed, that they get the information. So there's different ways of providing that information and providing it accurately and honestly. The other thing is that you have somebody who helps you decide where to knock. Everywhere in the district, 260,000 people, You have to know who are the people who are more likely to vote and who are able to vote, because we do have a lot of immigrants who are yet to be able to vote. Plus, we also have a lot of people who are just disenchanted with the system, people who feel apathy about voting. And so making sure that we reach out to people in different ways. And so we have a field director. And then because this is a very expensive campaign to reach 260,000 people, recently I hired someone to be a finance director. That way she can do some research for me and help guide me as I ask different people for contributions to support my campaign.
And what about, do you have volunteers? Do you have people that help you otherwise?
Yeah, actually, because in 2018 when I ran, I think that was one of the most interesting things is for all the 110 House candidates that were running on the Democratic side, I was the one that not only had the most money that I was able to raise, but also the most number of volunteers that came forward to support my campaign, because they knew how much I had volunteered alongside them for different things in the community. They volunteered. I didn't have to pay people to go and knock doors to say, will you vote for PADMA KUPPA, or here's PADMA KUPPA's information. There were people, in fact, there's one young lady who was a Girl Scout when I was a Girl Scout leader, and she's grown up. She was working on getting her degree in engineering, and she went door to door and said, Miss Padma was my Girl Scout leader. And then somebody else who knew me from my children's school, teachers. Some of the teachers knew how much I cared about the education that they were providing to students. And so the teachers went out and knocked doors for me. And then there's another organization called Moms Demand Action. They're one of the leading organizations in preventing gun violence and enacting policies that will prevent gun violence. And so they came out and knocked doors. So it was really a grassroots movement where so many people came forward to help.
That's excellent. And how, over the course of your day, how much of your day is dedicated to the campaign?
Wow. Some of it is also legislative, because I have still been working on policy-related things. I had a group from Ann Arbor from the University of Michigan that reached out to me to help enact some policy about preventing sexual assault. So I've been doing the research and trying to figure out. So maybe a 1/3, 2/3 split, but my day is usually about 12 to 13 hours.
Yeah, and I can attest to that, obviously. Seeing your campaign from up close, because of my involvement, obviously, in the community, it is astounding. It's a work ethic that is permeated throughout your office, and I see it in all the volunteers and all of those whom you have hired. I see them day in and day out, parked just at the office, nonstop, in contact, and I think it's that dedication that flows from you onto them. It wouldn't be any other way.
I think also, to some extent, it is the immigrant work ethic. But also, I was the first woman to do mechanical engineering in the college that I went to, in the history of that college, in 1955, and I was there from 84 to 88. And as the first woman, I kind of had to prove myself. I had to work a little harder, because they weren't quite ready for a woman to walk into mechanical engineering at that point. There were very few women in the engineering profession in the 80s to begin with, and it was even more rare to see a woman in mechanical engineering. And so I think that also plays into it. My work ethic is based on always having to prove myself as a woman in a male-dominated field. You work a little harder. Sure. And you want the best for your kids. I mean, for me, I think that's always been the most important thing. Is it's not just my children, it's every child. That child needs and deserves the best. There are miracles. Every single child is a miracle. And just making sure that they get the best from us as adults. When we say that children are our future, we have to act like it.
What does, obviously, we're getting closer to the election. This community, much like your community, is a new immigrant, newly arrived community in relative terms. For those of us who don't know, Give us the information with respect to how do we vote, where do we vote, what does that look like?
So actually, because being from the Indian immigrant community, this is something that I've always stressed, that go to vote411.org. You will find out what's on your ballot. I think that's one of the most important things a person can do. You put in your address and it'll tell you everything that's going to be on your ballot. And you can read about both candidates. You can sometimes have to read between the lines because people will put some information. You have to go check their website and maybe check a couple of other places. But also there are nonpartisan races. So state representative, state senator, these are partisan. But then you go down the ballot, you might be voting on ballot proposals. You might be voting on judges. Judges are nonpartisan races. So you need to make sure that you vote for everything on the ballot. Where will you go to get your ballot? You go to city clerk's office to make sure you're registered. You can go to the Secretary of State's office. But I'll tell you, if you look me up at American Kahani, Kahani in Hindi means the word story. And so AmericanKahani.com, and you look up Padma Kuppa. I'm an author there, and every month I write for a largely South Asian audience that's national and explain to them what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And this month, I actually wrote about how do you find out all these things, and where do you get the recommendations, and how do you advocate on certain things, and how do you get involved in a campaign. All of that's at my American Kahani op-eds.
So within your jurisdiction, the jurisdiction that you're running, which is the jurisdiction of the Senate for this particular seat, each of the cities then, each resident living in each of the cities, which are Troy, Rochester Hills, Sterling Heights, Shelby, and Utica, they can
and
go,
Oakland Township.
And Oakland Township. They can all go, everyone residing in that particular community can go to their city clerk, retrieve their ballot, and vote. They can do so, correct me if I'm wrong, they can do so before November 8th, which is the day of the election. And then
they get their ballot, they look online, or they look at what's there. Make sure that if you live in Troy, that there are also House candidates. I have a friend named Sharon McDonald who's been doing a lot of work in Troy. And worked alongside me on so many issues of keeping our public library open. She's one of the House candidates. And then in another part of Troy, which overlaps with Sterling Heights, Aisha Faruqi is running, and she is the other House candidate. So these are the two, 56 and 57. But majority of my district is Senate District 9. So make sure that you look for my name and fill in the bubble on the ballot next to Padma Kuppa.
Thank you. And now, what is, and we spoke about this briefly earlier, but to complete that part of the conversation, why would you say you are the right choice for our community as opposed to the opponent?
So this is, I think, where I really believe that we need to reestablish a stronger path to the American middle class. Many of us came to the United States as immigrants because it offered opportunity. It offered, if you worked hard, you could get something. You had to work twice as hard as your parents to stay in the same place in India, and sometimes 3 times as hard. Whereas here, if you worked hard, you could get to the next level. Your children could get the better education. They could make, you lived in one house, they could live in a bigger house, or maybe they could, they could do differently what they wanted to do. They could pursue a career, maybe not just what brought home the money, but maybe something that they had a passion for. And I think that's not available to all Americans anymore. You don't have basic health care. Sometimes people are making decisions between what medicine they can afford and what groceries they can afford because they don't have health insurance through their job. They don't have access to affordable prescription drugs. These are things that we're a developed nation. Sometimes people can't even afford their rent. These are not things that should happen in our country, and particularly in Michigan, which is the home of the American middle class. 50 years ago, 60 years ago, you could go out of high school, get a job on the auto line, and have a good life. You can't do that anymore. Teachers are struggling. Sometimes teachers work 2 and 3 jobs, not only to make enough money to keep a roof over their head and feed their family, but also to provide things in their classroom. Teachers shouldn't have to spend extra money because we're paying taxes to make sure that we fund our schools. The other thing is that many students are ending up with college debt. And I want to say, there is a Macedonian gentleman that came to me as I was knocking doors in 2019. He said, you know, Mike, I came to this country without college debt. I got my degree in Macedonia. I said, I did too. I got my degree in India. I didn't come here with debt from college, whereas our children are graduating with enormous amounts of college debt. What am I doing about it? He wanted to know. So this year I actually worked across the aisle, bipartisan bill package that will help with college debt, that will help defray or reduce college debt for students. If they go into professions where we have a worker shortage, where that profession, we don't have enough people in that profession, they will get some relief. And I think that's a really, and also if they work in areas where there are not enough workers. We don't have enough healthcare workers in rural areas. Important thing to make sure that we have. So I think that's where I differ. I look at a problem and I want to fix it, and I try to find ways to fix it in a way that will benefit all and lift all boats. I also don't just listen to whoever's at the top and do what they say. I have the best interest of my constituents at heart, and I engage. I show up. You know, yesterday night we had a candidate forum with the Rochester Hills PTA. My opponent sent in written responses. I actually showed up and I answered questions, the prepared questions, but I also answered questions that were asked on the spot by members of the audience. And I think that shows the difference. I'm willing to work hard, and I'm willing to earn your vote and retain your vote. And I think that is what government should be about. If you are doing this, this isn't just about collecting a paycheck and going along with whatever leadership says. This is also about serving your community, making sure that you help them navigate what government services are available. During the pandemic, people had lots of questions. And I made sure that if I didn't know the answer, that we found out the answer and we helped them. If people suggested things to me, you know, in 2019, I took a lot of the legislation based on what had been introduced before. But in my second term, people would come to me with ideas. And so I would go around and ask, like, how can I, this is an idea that came from a constituent. And one of the ideas was actually a group of beekeepers had asked, can we do something to protect bees in the state of Michigan? Because there's certain pesticides that are harmful. This affects our food supply. This is EPA would not ban this family of pesticides called neonicotinoids. I had to learn about neonicotinoids. I have a team of 2 people in the legislative staff. They helped me. And then we talked to different organizations that do this work. And what we did was we discovered that milkweed is considered a noxious plant. And monarch butterflies are really important pollinators in the state of Michigan. We don't allow people to have milkweed. And so Sterling Heights, I worked with the mayor. We now have, they gave away pollinator plants that are helpful to pollinators, but we also introduced legislation to ban the neonicotinoid pesticides in the state of Michigan. And this is where I'm really engaged with the community to hear what their concerns are, and I think that's what's different about me.
That's great. And overall, who are the supporters of your campaign?
So I'm very proud to say that there's a number of organizations that are listed on my website at electpadmakuppa.com/endorsements, and you can see all the different kinds of endorsements. Not only do I have organizational endorsements, one of the big organizations that endorses me is the Michigan Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers, because my parents are educators. I value teachers, and I value, they're the ones that give our children knowledge. And so having the teacher's endorsement was very important to me. But I also have other leaders and other organizations. The varying unions, United Auto Workers and Pipe Trades, and there's many, many other, Michigan Regional Carpenters Council, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, many of these organizations, they support and endorse me because I represent the values of their members. So I'm representing working families and working people across the region who then support me. And then the other thing is I have the support of many, many elected leaders. Haley Stevens is a congresswoman for Troy. Sterling Heights, the Congressman Andy Levin. And for Rochester, Rochester Hills, the current Congresswoman is Alyssa Slotkin. All three of them have endorsed me. I'm also very proud to say that Senator Gary Peters has endorsed me, and that there are many local officials, the mayor of Sterling Heights, the mayor pro tem of Troy, the former mayor of Utica. I can go on, but you can go look on the website to see the local leaders and school board members. And so it's really, and many of my current colleagues and future colleagues are very excited about me serving alongside them in the Senate.
That's great. That, and of course, as we wrap up, the election is just around the corner. What is left to be done in your campaign? So
I'm still raising money, because I still want to make sure that I get the message out to all those people, because there are people who vote on election day. There are people who are making their decisions now by putting their absentee ballot in the mail, filling it out. And you can do that. You can go right now to the clerk's office and pick up your ballot and fill it out and drop it off at the clerk's office in a secure drop box. But you can also go on election day. So we need to get the message out until the very last day. And so making sure that I have the funding to do that all the way to the last day. But we are knocking doors, we are calling people, we are texting people to make sure that they have a plan to vote. Because, you know, you may want to vote, but you may not, once you get closer to election day, you know what, it's Halloween's coming, something else is happening. For me, Diwali is coming up next week. You know, it's people are doing things and busy with their jobs and their lives. And so making sure that we help people if they don't have a plan to vote, making sure that they have that plan to vote and checking in with them. These are the things that we're currently doing. And just, you know, interviews. Yesterday I was asked by Detroit Free Press why I supported something. So I had to take that interview. Another day I took another interview from another local paper on something that I support. And so making sure that I'm engaging with whatever news sources are interviewing me as well. It's one of the important things.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you here. Usually I reserve this, you know, the last moments of any interview that we conduct here with obviously with all the help and assistance of ACTV, to say thank you and then to speak to our community. But you are a very capable politician, very eloquent, and speak very charmingly about all the things that you're passionate about. So I think it's appropriate that you have the final say tonight. So the bully pulpit is yours.
Sure. So this is the thing I will leave you with. Voting is one of the most important things that we can do. It is at once a privilege and a duty. And it is important that we take that privilege and that duty and execute it every election, not just November 8th, 2022, but every election. And I will say also that volunteering is the ultimate exercise in democracy. So get involved. Vote for me on November 8th, but also follow what we do, which is follow what I do as a legislator, make sure that you know what your elected officials are doing, and volunteer, because if you don't like something, we're a democracy. Get involved.
Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.